if you don't count the, quote, millions of people who voted illegally. That was a tweet he sent out over the weekend, and that is false. There is not a shred of evidence that he has presented or anyone. So what are the Democrats' plans for how to tackle fake news and erroneous tweets over the next 4 years? Let's discuss this and so much more with New York Democratic Congresswoman who sits on the Committee of Homeland Security, Representative Kathleen Rice. Great to see you here.
Great to be here.
So are you all talking about that problem that President-elect Trump tweets out things that have no evidence and are demonstrably false?
Well, I think it's just more of the same. I mean, we saw a campaign for almost 2 years that involved just those kind of claims. So I think most Americans are waiting to see exactly what, when he starts to, when he is sworn in, what is actually going to be put into action, not just the words and the rhetoric.
And then what's your plan? Do you ignore them? Do you refute them?
Well, I think that what we have to do is do what we've been doing all along, which is try to get people in the media, like yourself, to call him out when he is saying things that are not true. But at the end of the day, the American people are going to want to see actual action. It's not going to be enough to tweet things out. It's not going to be enough to hold rallies. You have to actually present things like budgets and get people to compromise and work with you to get America back on track.
Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, as you know, there's also this recount effort underway, started by Jill Stein, who ran for president, and it has now been joined by what was Hillary Clinton's campaign to, again, count the votes in 3 battleground states that were extremely close, despite the fact that there's no evidence that any election officials can find of voter fraud there either. What do you think of that effort?
It's not something that I would support. I think that we need to move forward. I understand, if Jill Stein wants to start this and the Clinton campaign wants to get on board, that's fine. But I think what this country needs is for us to move forward. There's no evidence that there was any fraud involved. We have to accept the results, whether you like them or not, and move forward.
Okay, so let's talk about who is going to lead the Democrats moving forward. You have decided that you will support Congressman Tim Ryan over Nancy Pelosi. That election comes up, that race is this week. What does he have that she doesn't?
He's a new voice. We need new leadership. I was very clear when we came back to Washington after the election that we needed to at least start to have a conversation about what went wrong, why are we so far in the minority, and why since 2010 have we been losing election cycle after election cycle.
And what have you concluded about that?
Well, we need accountability, and there's no accountability from leadership. This is not personal against Nancy Pelosi. I like her very much. I think she's done great things for the Democratic caucus. She was the first woman Speaker of the House. These are great things. But now in 2016, we need new leadership. We need a new voice, and I think that Tim represents that voice, and he can be a great leader.
Well, there's leadership, there are issues.
Well, Tim Ryan has a very clear message. He thinks and has said that he believes the Democratic Party has become a coastal party, California and New York, and we need to be talking to people in Ohio and Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and all across the country, and that's a message that we did not have in this election, and we need to hear what the voters have said. We cannot do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And Tim has a plan for how to kind of take the Democratic Party, bring it back to the middle of the country, and speak to people who want the Democratic Party back on their side.
Last week he was called a long shot. Do you think he's still a long shot to win?
I think he has a really good chance of winning. I mean, this is internal politics. This is going to be a vote that we hold within our caucus. I think that Tim has enormous support. It's tough to challenge someone.
Do you think he has the numbers?
Oh, I do. I do. I think the numbers are there, and I think it's going to be whether or not we as a Democratic caucus decide that this is the time that we need new leadership. Again, it's not anything personal. But, if you look at people in the private sector, if you don't bring results, you're out. And I think that we are at that point now in 2016, after 4 successive cycles of losing more and more races, we need to bring a new voice in, and I think Tim Ryan is that voice.
Do you have any fear that if Nancy Pelosi wins and he loses, that you, having been so public, will fall out of favor?
Well, I think I probably am not in good favor right now, but this is what we need in Washington. We need people in positions like mine to speak truth to power. It's very difficult to do in Washington because the system is set up to support support powerful people. And it's very difficult to get people like me or Tim Ryan into the conversation. So I'm very proud of the support that I'm giving Tim. Again, this is not personal. I think that this is what we need more of. We need people who are willing to come out and say, you know what, we need to try something different. And I hope that more of my colleagues will follow me on that path.
Who do you think should lead the DNC?
That's going to be a question that people are going to decide within that organization.
Keith Ellison?
I know Keith Ellison. I think he's a great guy. I have not weighed into that.
You want to?
That argument. I'm very focused now on Wednesday and the election that's going to take place with our Democratic caucus in Congress.
Congresswoman Kathleen Rice, thanks so much for coming in and previewing it all with us.
Thank you.
Nice to talk to you. Let's get over to Chris.
All right, Allison. So on the campaign trail, President-elect Trump promised to reverse President Obama's policies restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba. So what happens now that Fidel Castro is
straight to the source?
Would Israel be willing to go along with those demands?
To a side you haven't seen.
That sounds a young man's game.
All the way to the heart of a problem.
What is going on in Ferguson, Missouri, in downtown America?
Maybe all the way to the president.
Do you think you were naive back then?
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Weekdays at 4.
Hello, I'm CNN's Richard Quest. I watch CNN Go wherever I may find myself. It's really very simple. First, grab your phone or tablet. Oh, thank you. Press TV, select CNN International, and log in with your TV provider. CNN International on CNN Go. The best way to watch CNN anytime, anywhere. What a view.
So how will President-elect Donald Trump handle relations with Cuba once he's sworn in 53 days? That is the question, excuse me, on many minds after Fidel Castro's death over the weekend. Trump has been critical of President Obama lifting the embargo with Cuba, so what would he do differently? Let's discuss it with CNN political commentator and former South Carolina Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer. He met with Castro on a trip to Cuba in 2003. Also joining us is Florida Congressman Carlos Curbelo, who is Cuban American. Gentlemen, it's great to have you because you both have personal experiences with Castro and Cuba. So, Andre, let me start with you. What was that trip like to Cuba in 2003 and your meeting with Fidel Castro, and what were you hoping to get out of it?
Well, it was definitely eye-opening to see how oppressed those people are, to watch the people in line just to get a loaf of bread. It was really moving as a young man. I went down there as a 33-year-old, new to the whole process, and meeting with him for 4 hours and trying to engage in discussion. He got very aggravated with me when I talked about allowing Americans to come down and open businesses, allowing Americans to own real estate, and what he said was going to be a 30-minute meeting went on for about 4 hours. I don't think he was used to having somebody challenge him. So it was interesting, but this is a real opportunity for the American people and for the Cuban people.
Congressman, your parents are Cuban exiles. How has that colored your impression of the way forward here?
Well, there's not a lot of mourning going on in Miami, to say the least. People here feel relieved. This is where the victims of Castro's dictatorship, this is where many of them live. My family is just one of hundreds of thousands of families who live here in South Florida and who have in some way been hurt by the Castro government. I was encouraged by the president-elect's statement. It's obvious that he's approaching this relationship with Cuba with clear eyes. It's obvious that he knows the nature of the Castro regime. He said the truth about who Fidel Castro was and the horrific crimes that he perpetrated, not just against the Cuban people, but also against many Americans. And it was a sharp contrast to President Obama's statement and to President Obama's policies over the last 2 years, where it's been one unilateral concession after another to a government that is an enemy of the United States, that still opposes our interests throughout the world, that is responsible for the death of American citizens. So I think we're going to see a different approach starting on January 20th.
Let's talk about that different approach, Andre. What do you want to see President-elect Trump do differently and try to get out of this relationship with Cuba?
Well, right off the bat, they need to release political prisoners. Be great if they'd apologize for some of the atrocities they've done and do. And to have a neighbor that we aren't working with is a missed opportunity. I'm glad to see President-elect Trump talking in that type of tone.
Congressman, I want to put up for our viewers and you the two condolence messages, basically, or at least announcements of death. President Obama versus President-elect Trump and how they responded to Fidel Castro's death, because there is sort of a stark difference here. So let me put up first President Obama. Prayers are with the Cuban people. Donald Trump took a different tact. He said, though the tragedies, deaths, and pain caused by Fidel Castro cannot be erased, our administration will do all it can to ensure the Cuban people can finally begin their journey toward prosperity and liberty. Congressman, what did you think?
It was an apology to the American people, not just to Cuban Americans who have felt so much of this pain, but I remind people, Fidel Castro is the man who had nuclear missiles installed in Cuba and pointed to the United States. He brought the world to the brink of a nuclear war. And for the president to say, also in that statement, he said, history will judge Fidel Castro. We don't have to wait. We know that this man was a tyrant. He was a murderer. He worked against the United States every single day of his life when he was in power. And you look at the contrast to the president-elect, who is being honest. And by the way, that helps explain why this last election went the way it went. The American people want to be told the truth. The American people are sick and tired of this political speak, this lukewarmness, lack of honesty. And I just think January 20th, we're going to be opening up a new chapter in U.S.-Cuba relations. The Cuban government be put first. We're going to put the interests of the oppressed Cuban people first. And hopefully, we will get the kind of change we all want in Cuba, a change that, of course, will lead to many opportunities, including business opportunities in the future. But as long as Cuba remains a closed society, an oppressive, repressive government that opposes American interests, it's going to be very hard to get there. We need to put the pressure on them.
So, Andre, what do you think about diplomatic relations? What do you think about the embassy there in Cuba that is reopened? Is it too soon?
Well, I think that there are folks like the representative on the show here, Mel Martinez, Senator Rubio, folks that are much more knowledgeable than I, but we've got to have some feedback, with positive feedback from their government. For too long, people have been oppressed, people have been jailed that spoke out. We've got to have a system where they show us in good faith they want to work with us. And hopefully with the, I'm an opportunist and a continually looking for a new way to hopefully find better relations. And hopefully with Fidel's passing, that government will look and say, this part of the regime is gone and we want to try to change our ways. I don't know that they will, but I'm hoping that. And with the tone that Donald Trump has set, that sets the stage for at least some type of understanding and discussions to start.
Yeah, very interesting to see what happens over the next days. Andre Bauer, Congressman Curbelo, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Let's get to Chris.
All right, we're going to talk about Trump's unresolved financial conflicts. It is the danger of the unknown and also what is known. What could happen going forward, even before the inauguration? We'll take a closer look.